to Leading in Life. This is the show where I talk about anything and everything related to how we can lead and live more flourishing lives. I'm your host, Dr. Kathy Ann Hernandez, also known as Dr. H. Today's topic, trauma, dealing with the hurt. Let's dive in.
What is trauma? What is trauma? When you hear the word trauma, it's going to sound like drama, which perhaps is not a bad thing. Welcome those of you who are joining us. What are you eating? What are you drinking? Where are you joining in from? Naja, welcome, my sister from Entrusted Woman. So we're talking about trauma today, and the question I am posing is, when you hear the word trauma, what comes to mind? I would like to know. So I'm a professor by trade, so I don't mind waiting in the silence, and there is no right or wrong answer, but I want to hear your thoughts around the word. Hey, Calinthia, it has become much used now in the media. We talk about trauma. So what is trauma? And while you are thinking, get your tea, get your snack, pet your dog, pet your cat, whatever. I'm waiting for the comments. So for those of you who are joining in late, I spoke about, and I've written in my book about some of the childhood trauma I experienced being abandoned by my mother. But today, I want to focus on trauma in my professional life as a Black woman in the academy. I am waiting, people. What is trauma? What comes to mind? No right or wrong answer. Elder Mayo, welcome back. Thank you for hanging in with me. It's a heavy weight we carry around. Oh my goodness, without a break. I want to say I love that, but it is so visually stimulating. It's a heavy weight we carry around. Yes, lots of trauma for Black women in the academy. You and I know about that, right? So it's a heavy weight. What is trauma? What is trauma? Anybody else writing? So while you are thinking, let me tell you about. I don't want to give the answer. It's remembered hurt we feel in our bodies. Remembered hurt we feel in our bodies. I love this, and I love that the comments are going to be there for people to see. So I'm going to read a definition for you from the American Psychological Association. It says trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. That's their definition. It is an emotional response. But I like the definitions that you have given, Calinthia and Lisette. Remembered hurt we feel in our bodies. It's a heavy weight. I like the definition given by Paul Conti in his book. Let me get it over here. Trauma, the invisible epidemic. Trauma, the invisible epidemic. And what he says is, and this resonates with me, and if it resonates with you, put a hand clap or an emoji in the comments. Anything that causes emotional or physical pain that leaves its mark on a person as life moves forward. Anything that causes emotional or physical pain and leaves its mark on a person as life moves forward. Anything that causes physical and emotional pain and it leaves a mark on a person as life moves forward. And I want us to unpack that a bit. And I'm coming to you from a Christian framework and from an understanding, like in John 16:33, the Bible, Jesus says, in this life, you will have trouble. In this life, you will have trouble. That is the world that we live in. And so I want to use, please don't laugh. But I want to use this image that I drew, right? Let's say this is you. Sadly, this is all I can do for you. But as we go through life, these things happen to us. These things happen to us. We experience all of these things that cause emotional and physical pain, and they leave a mark on us as we go forward in life. The thing is, unlike a broken leg or eczema or a scar or a mastectomy or what have you, when we walk around, you see me, I see you. But underneath all of that, all of these hurts, all of these pains, all of these things that happen to us that cause emotional and physical pain as we process through life. What is more, do you see this spot here? Sometimes it's as though we keep getting this blow in the same spot over and over and over again. That is trauma. And sometimes it is so severe, it's almost as if we have a broken limb. But this is what we see. This is what we see, because for the most part, trauma is almost invisible. That's why Paul Conti calls it an invisible epidemic. And an epidemic means that it's pervasive. None of us is immune from experiencing those blows in life. In this world, you will have trouble. So, if this definition resonates with you, could you give me a little thumbs up or something? Anything that causes emotional or physical pain and leaves its mark on a person as life moves forward. So I think one of the things, yes, it resonated with me. One of the things about that definition that I really like is it makes us recognize that we are not alone. As we process through life, trauma, invisible, for the most part, invisible hurts and pains that leave a scar on us. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience professionally and how I was walking around like this, happy, thinking I'm all right. Oh yeah, this is me. I was so not all right. I was so not all right. And I know most of you know my story. I came to the U.S. from Trinidad and Tobago, from a country where being black was like, it's the majority. I had people in power who looked like me. I didn't think of my skin color as much as I thought about my cultural ethnic identity. I was Trinidadian, so to speak. And so I've been in the U.S. now for I think over 20 years. And gradually, and we know this term where we talk about microaggressions. I was having experiences that were in many ways verbal, nonverbal, and environmental snobs, insults, whether intentional or unintentional, that was making me feel inferior. In some way, they were negative messages about me and what I can do. And I didn't realize how this is what was happening to me. And there's a term for this in the literature. It's called racial trauma. Racial trauma. Repeatedly, these things were happening. And let me give you some, for instance. So I remember my daughter was attending a predominantly white school. And one day there was a key to get in. And one day I had forgotten my code. And so I saw another parent going in, and I was coming in right after her. And she turned around and she looked at me. You would have thought I had some kind of gun or something. And she was like, "Do you have a key?" And when I went home, I thought about it, and I said, well, maybe she was just being cautious. You know, there are lots of children. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that part of her response to me was because I was Black. And that's one incident. So I'm telling you all of this to tell you that, and I have many others, but so this is, if you think about my racial bone, that's it right there. And I kept getting knocked and knocked in that places. And I was just brushing it off. I was just brushing it off. You know, I was just kind of, oh yeah, bouncing back and so on. And Calinthia and I know there are many other stories I can tell about that, where I have been in situations where I see people who are white being given preferential treatment that I am not getting. And so I'm telling you this to tell you that something happened to me. I was in crisis and I did not know it. And I'm sharing this with you because I don't know what your story is, but there's something, some hurt that you have experienced repeatedly, and you do not realize that you are in crisis. If it was a physical ailment, you should probably go to the emergency room right now. So when George Floyd died, I shut down. It was as though all of those things had just become too much to bear. It was just on and on and on. And that's when I really recognized that I was in a bad way, y'all. I was in a very, very bad way. And when I had to talk to my daughter about what had happened, I could barely speak. I didn't have the words because it had just reached to that boiling point. So you're here listening. I don't know what it is for you, but sometimes based on our circumstances, on the situation, we have a repeated traumatic event that is like a heavy weight, like Lisette says, and then Calinthia says that it's hurt that affects our bodies. Let me tell you about racial trauma. So I began to investigate it because I could barely talk without crying. I could barely speak. I didn't want to talk to anybody, especially anybody who was not Black. I was angry. And the thing is, it had come upon me suddenly because I wasn't aware that this was my condition. And so what this was racial trauma, a form of race-based stress ignited from dangerous events, real or perceived. So maybe I was judging that mother wrongly for looking at me funny because I was trying to go through the door, but it doesn't matter. Real or perceived, these repeated attempts, it presents this collective injury and re-exposure to a kind of stress that affects us. And I have lots of research, but I don't want to talk about that. If you want all the notes, I could tell you about it afterwards, right? So William Smith, an education professor, he has used the term racial battle fatigue. That's what I was experiencing, racial battle fatigue. And let me tell you some of the symptoms to go back to what Calinthia said. What the research has shown, how trauma can affect our bodies. Tension headaches, check. Insomnia, check. Difficulty thinking or speaking, that was me. Mood swings and social withdrawal. And so trauma is very, very real. And as we process through life, it's important that we take stock. We go to the doctor to take care of our physical and our mental ailments, right? It's very physical ailments. It's very important that we stop to acknowledge that we live in a society, we live in a world where we are going to be exposed to something that will cause emotional or physical injury that in some way can affect us going forward in life. So if what I'm saying resonates with you, if you're thinking about your own experience, why don't you just put in the chat hashtag hurt, hashtag hurt. And I'm speaking here, and I know this is a sensitive topic, so I'm not asking you to be out there. But if you have a piece of paper, because I'm going to share some steps that I have taken, that I took in for going forward. Hashtag hurt, hurt, yes, hurt. And so I want to talk a little bit. I want to cement, because I want it to be urgent. I want it to be urgent. You know, I think if I wasn't who I was, I probably could have had some kind of breakdown. I was so distraught. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward. But I'll tell you what I did. And so let's talk about trauma. Trauma is a villain we meet on our quest to have a meaningful life. It's the enemy. And as we're trying to live our life in our quest to flourish, it does damage that changes us, and it reinforces our anxieties as we go through life, you know. In the context of when I sit and I talk about these issues at times, because so I do research on women in academia, Black women just like me, and some of the experiences that they're having. And when I talk to them and I think about the inequities, it makes me anxious sometimes. It makes me feel almost hopeless, like things aren't going to change. And so trauma begins to try to steal your dream and your hope for a meaningful or happy life, whether it is abuse, whether it is discrimination, whether it's some kind of traumatic event that you had as a child. It tries to steal and hijack your story. That's what it does. Unless you decide that I'm not going down like that. That's what I said. I am not going down like that. I've been through too much. Unless you take back the power. And so it affects our quest to live a full and meaningful life. Secondly, as Kalinche alluded to, and as I pointed out from what I read earlier, it affects our biology and psychology. Headaches, insomnia, ulcers, if unattended. And it affects how we think about ourselves. I could begin to believe that I'm less than because of how I've been treated in certain places, right? I can begin to believe that I am not as competent as others because my accomplishments are not valued or rewarded. So it affects our psychology. And one of the reasons that we ignore these effects is because trauma itself, it changes how we see ourselves and how we think about things in life. So I will tell you, I am not the same Black woman who came here 20 years ago. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Because of the experiences I have had, it has changed how I think and how I feel, especially when I talk about racial injustice. That's what it does to us, right? And so one other thing I'm going to say, I really want to get this. So another thing I want to say, this enemy makes us feel conflicted about who we are and what we are capable of achieving and what we deserve. Trauma changes our emotions and memories, and it changes the decisions that we make and often the cause of our life. So I want to, I said I was going to talk about professionally, but I also want to share with you how trauma was almost trying to rob me from the life that I wanted to have. So being abandoned by my mother as a baby, I lived in this fear of, I don't want to repeat that with my children. I don't, it was just this big thing to overcome. And so I would get involved in relationships, and then whenever it was getting serious, I would find a way to break it off. And so I would sabotage the relationships. And as I processed and thought about the reasons why I was doing this without even realizing it, it was more like I was operating from a paradigm, a script that I had in my head: reject them before they reject you. Yes, thank you guys for listening. That was a test. You passed the test. The script was reject them before they reject you. And so trauma messes with us psychologically, and it becomes like a villain to almost take from us, to hijack our story and our quest for a meaningful life. There are different types of trauma, and I want to identify acute trauma, which is often a severe event that you might have had, like an accident or witnessing somebody die. You know that when it's happened, you are no longer the same. It's something so severe and so traumatic, and that's acute trauma. But then we have chronic trauma, which is what I refer to about my experiences with racial discrimination or microaggressions. And it's chronic. It happens repeatedly. And sometimes it's on the same spot. And so it's chronic. You have ongoing sexual abuse. You have racial trauma. And so those are some examples of chronic trauma. And then you have vicarious trauma, where you hear about something that happens to somebody, and you're such a compassionate and sensitive person that you begin to internalize the hurt. And often this happens to us because in some way their story is close to ours, right? And so I don't like to hear about stories about children who have been abandoned or hurt, because it's as though I'm experiencing it at a different level, and so I can't really separate myself from them. Do I have a witness to some of that? So that's vicarious trauma. And then we have what's called post-traumatic syndromes. And we often think about this in relation to post-traumatic stress disorder, usually associated with those who have been through war. But post-traumatic syndromes really refer to a whole host of negative problems that we can develop because of acute, chronic, or vicarious trauma. So because we've been exposed to trauma, we can develop this host of negative attitudes, behaviors, and so on. But what I really want you to know is that we are more than what happened to us. And we have the capacity to take back our story. Hashtag take back your story. Take back your story. And so there are 5 links to begin the process of healing from trauma. And I would say, first of all, I am not a therapist. And like I pointed out here with this drawing, some of the acute kind of trauma that we get as we go through life, we really need to seek professional help. It is so deep, it is so invasive that a Band-Aid will not quite work. Or if you have a bruise, you put something on it to put it down. But some of them, they're so deep that we need professional help. And so, but I firmly believe that we have the capacity to really study ourselves and recognize these hurts and begin to take steps towards healing. And so there are 5 links in that. 5 links. The first one is knowledge, and that's what you're doing here today. That's what you're doing. Understanding just how big an issue trauma is. It is. So knowledge, learning about trauma, Power, once you understand, then recognize that you can be empowered to take back your story. That's what I had to do when I, being born and being abandoned by my mother. That's a rotten script to begin life with. Can we agree on that? Okay. And I was like, oh no. When I was finally able, and I did go to counselors and talk with people, I am going to write a different story for my life. And so this is what I am challenging you to do with whatever the issue is, right? Knowledge, then you realize that you can take action, empowered. And when you take action, that there is hope. Regardless of what has happened to us, we can do something about it. Regardless of what has happened to us, we can do something about it. It's still your story. How do you want to write the ending? How do I want to write the ending? And I don't have all the answers. I deal with this every day. But I'm pretty sure about one thing. I'm going to hold that pen. I am going to hold that pen. And with God's help, I am going to rewrite that story. So knowledge, power, and once we realize we have power, we can begin on the path to healing. And because of that, we can have hope for moving forward. And we need to recognize how urgent it is. I say that because trauma has already begun its work in you, in me. We're kind of late getting to deal with this issue, really. Because I told you I had no idea how the cumulative effects of racial microaggression and all the things I was experiencing was hurting me until George Floyd died. And so it's urgent. So let me tell you what I did. And I'm going to be drawing a bit from some of the work I do as a professor. So these are 2 books that I have worked with others to write. And there's a fancy word for it, but it's real simple. We call it autoethnography. It means the study of self. The study of self. To understand and to gain insight about a common human condition, and that is trauma. Trauma is common to all of us. So I'm going to give you 4 steps before my phone dies. Number 1, you can take a piece of pen, and if I don't get through in the comments, I will put the link to Value What Matters, and I can send you these questions. Number 1, listen to me. We spend so much time on clothes and shoes and all kinds of stuff. We need to make time to deal with this in our lives. We need to make time, okay? Because trauma is going to hijack your life story if you don't deal with it. So number 1, what I did was I really began, because I know about autoethnography, to sit down and ask myself, the first thing is to sit down and explore, begin to explore. And here's the question I have for you to write down. What are critical incidents in my experience with X? And you, whatever X is, what are some critical incidents in my experience with X? And I told you some of them as I went through my experience with racial microaggressions and so on. Just go back and try to think about them. What are critical incidents in my experience with X? Whether it's gender discrimination, whether it's racial discrimination, whether it's rejection, whether it's abuse, you identify your X. So once you have that question down, what I want you to do next is spend some time writing down. This is not for anybody's eyes. This is for your eye only. Writing down what your experiences were with that issue. If you don't like to write, talk it in your phone. I do that all the time. Talk it into your phone and then send it to your email or whatever. But spend some time really interrogating yourself. So that's the first question. You got that? Who, you got that? Yes. Okay. um so after you have done that, reflect on it, but then go back and revisit what you have written. What further questions do they bring up for you? So, so let's say after 2 or 3 days you've written or whatever, you go back and you read what you've written. You can write notes in the comment. What further questions do comes to your mind when you review what you have written? And so I would say one question that might surface is, what do these and how have these experiences affected my thinking, my emotions, and my behavior? How have these experiences affected my thinking, my emotions, and my behavior? So I told you about what I recognized about myself. And if I had not recognized that about myself and dealt with it, in that I would get into these relationships, and remember what my motto was: reject them before they reject you. Because my mother had abandoned me. If I hadn't gone back and recognized, hey, this is what I am doing, I probably would not have ended up with my husband now. Wouldn't that be sad? That would be very sad for me, because I really love him. And we have 2 beautiful children. So remember what I said, trauma can hijack your story. So go back, look at what you've written, and ask yourself, how have these experiences affected my thinking, my emotions, and my behavior? Are you still with me? Give me a thumbs up or something. Good, good, good. Very, very sad. Yes, Elder Mayo, it's very sad. And sometimes we're not even aware. We haven't taken the time to do this kind of internal work. So once you have done that, again, you may find yourself writing or talk it into your phone if you don't like to write. Recognize, what are these emotions? For me, I recognize one of these emotions was, one of the way I was feeling was like I wasn't worthy of being loved. I was, if my own mother had rejected me. And in the academy, I began to doubt my competence. Was I really able to do? What was it about me that was preventing me from getting into the C-suite? And what was I doing, or how was I complicit or not complicit in some of these? So do that deep internal work. Number 3, once you have done that, ask yourself, what positive action steps can I take to deal with the hurt that trauma has caused? What positive steps can I take to deal with the hurt that trauma has caused? If it's acute, if it's chronic, if it's vicarious, or if it is it has become a post-traumatic syndrome, what can you do? Therapy, you might recognize, this hurt is so deep, I need therapy. I need to talk to a professional. There's a lot to unpack there. Sometimes you need space from the people or the context that continues to inflict this trauma on you. Give up a position. Look for another setting or what have you. Oftentimes trauma makes us feel as though you don't have many options. But for me, one of the things that has been very helpful to me, because of this racial stress and everything, I needed a rest from my work environment. And luckily for me, I'm on a sabbatical. I really needed this time to be away from it. So sometimes you need space. Writing can help. Reading up some more about your issues or what your particular situation is. Advocacy, becoming an advocate, and so on. So once you have identified how this trauma has affected your thinking, your emotions, and your behavior, come up with an action plan for how you are going to deal with it. You're going to move forward so you can heal and take back your story. And finally, after some time, maybe after a couple of months or so, constantly evaluate how you're making progress along this pattern, right? So I started by telling you, did you get those? Are you still with me? Yes. And it's very unfortunate that in this setting, I don't get to talk back with you, but I hope that as I have been speaking, you have been thinking about your particular ex, whatever that X is, and that you will make time to take these steps. I have a saying where I've adopted, I say, dress the spirit. You get rid of shoes, handbags, all of these things. I once heard a lady at Boscov, an older lady, she was like, I need another top, like I need a hole in my head. That's what she said. Because you just realize that if you don't do the deep internal work, if you don't take the steps to spend the time so that you can take back your story. So what I did with my racial trauma was I took these very same steps. I spent some time exploring and unpacking why I was feeling this way. And I spoke with some of, this is another thing, you can talk to people in your circle of trust. I spoke to some of my sisters and we talked about it. And I began writing and exploring to really unpack the source of my discontent and how it was affecting my emotions, my thinking, and my behavior. And then I created a plan of action. I began doing more of this, talking, being an advocate for things that I believed in. I started to create a curriculum for my daughters around racial injustice because I want them to be educated and to be prepared. So see, this is the empowerment, I'm no longer a victim. And I began to think about myself outside of an institutional context where I am evaluated and promoted by them, right? I began to, and if you followed me, you see, to put myself out there, to recognize that I have something to contribute. Whether I'm black, white, yellow, green, I have something to contribute, and I don't need somebody else to affirm me. So I don't know what your story is, and I'm still working through that. But let me tell you, I'm in such a better place right now by taking these steps. And I so want that for you, whatever your ex is. Take back your story. Trauma happens to all of us. But we don't have to be victims. We can be empowered to begin to move forward and to heal. And if you missed any of these steps, I'm going to put my links in the comment and I'll be happy to send them to you. But I hope this has been helpful to you, if only for you to recognize that trauma is an epidemic and it's already doing its work in you and me just by virtue of living in this world. So we need to take active steps to deal with the hurt as we go through life and take back our story.